Finding no connection to Gloria in this regression, I called her in May 1987. "Were you involved in BJ's life as an opera singer?" I asked. "He didn't say anything about it in the regression, but it's strange that you should ask that now, Richard. Shirley J. Smith, a psychic here in Arlington, recently said to me, 'Did you know that you worked in the music business with BJ a long time ago? You used to write opera.'" "And Shirley knew nothing about the regression?" I questioned. "Nothing." Gloria's past life regressions. Gloria's first impressions were of a young girl named Rebecca riding in the back of a covered wagon. She was tending her sick and pregnant mother and described an older boy, BJ, who was outside pulling the cattle. While her father was away from the wagon hunting, Rebecca helped her mother give birth to a baby boy who quickly died. By the time her father returned, her mother was also dead. When projected forward to an important time in the future, Rebecca was 26 and giving birth to her first child. She had married the boy accompanying the wagon and did not want to be pregnant. "I was so afraid of pregnancy, I refused to have sex with him for years," she explained. "It was the only way I knew not to get pregnant." The birth of their daughter went well. "But after that, I just turned my head and lived the social image of a wife," Gloria explained after the regression. "It was our agreement that he resolve his sexual needs somewhere else. We lived in a small town and BJ took care of everything. I didn't have to worry about anything but the house. After crossing over into spirit as an old woman, I realized it was a very timid life. I was a sweet person, but I hid from things. BJ died 3 days after me in that incarnation." In the second regression, Gloria found herself in an ancient Greek lifetime. "I have blonde hair and blue eyes, and my name is Galari," she explained in a sweet voice. BJ maintained an important position in society. "I serve, honor, and worship him," she said, before proudly stating, "and I've given him 14 fine children." During our May 1987 phone conversation, I asked Gloria if Shirley J. Smith had uncovered any information that might provide additional understanding. She told me of a lifetime BJ and I shared in Egypt. He was an entertainer in the palace. I was a beautiful woman and of a higher social position. We were secret lovers, but I was very flamboyant and just toyed with people's lives. The scars I carry on my face today are a karmic balance relating directly back to that lifetime. Shirley says I returned with BJ in this life to learn to be responsible and to deal with some hard issues. BJ and I are here to learn to harmonize and attain a vibrational attunement we've set as a spiritual goal. Plus, we're paying back a lot of karma. Karmically, we arranged it so there is no way to run away from ourselves or each other. You know our backgrounds, Richard. As hard as we've both tried, it's been impossible for BJ and I to get rid of each other. There have been times when neither of us wanted to be around the other, yet neither could leave. And if we did, it was never for long. Did you know I was once in extensive therapy for codependency because I thought I was crazy? I thought, I'm a very sick person acting out her life. But when you asked for copies of the past life regression tapes, I listened to them again and realized how much progress we've made in 3 years. We've been working on the things we most need to learn. And as we learn, life gets better. Wisdom erases karma, I said lightly. Both BJ and I will buy that, she laughed. Chapter 4. Susie Madden and the Marine. Susie looked up from straightening the sweater display to see Robert, the pride of Salt Lake City's U.S. Marine recruiters, standing militantly before her with another Marine. "Susie, this is Don. He's my replacement. Don, Susie's assistant manager of this wonderful boutique." "Hi, Robert," Susie replied. "Is your next assignment going to be more exciting than recruiting high school kids in a shopping mall?" "Hi, Don." She held out her hand and looked into his eyes as he stared at her. She felt a flicker of recognition, and she bit her lip as she resisted a panicked reaction. He was looking into her very soul. "Oh, my God, I know you. I know you completely," she thought wildly, as an electrifying shudder reverberated through her. "I've loved you before." Her thoughts whirled out of control for what seemed like minutes. "I'm very glad to meet you," Don said, cupping his other hand over hers and squeezing it lightly. Moments later, Robert was escorting Don into the next store in the Cottonwood Mall to complete his rounds of introductions. Delma, the store manager, looked at Susie. "Are you all right?" Yes. It's just that I thought I recognized Don for a moment, but it was silly." "Well, he certainly noticed you. You could drown in those big brown eyes of his, couldn't you?" Delma laughed. "Anyway, it'll be a lot nicer to have Don working upstairs. Robert always bugged me." "Me too," Susie replied vaguely, her mind going over her reaction to the tall Marine. How foolish. How could I think I know a man I just met? I certainly have never met him in this life. That leaves only reincarnation, and I don't know that much about past lives. Susie experienced the same reaction when she ran into Don at the fast food stand, where she went for morning coffee, and again the following Friday in the crowded mall restaurant when they shared a table. She attempted to explain it to Delma. "There's such an intense familiarity, excitement, and sense of anticipation. It makes me crazy. I really feel like I know the inner man completely. It's only the surface aspects that are new to me, and it's delightful getting to know them." "Sounds like love to me," Delma responded as she hung the latest shipment of designer pants on the circular rack. "Love makes everybody crazy and explains everything." Susie straightened the earring display, glad no customers were in the store. "It's very strange, Delma. I sense that he's afraid of me, while at the same time he's drawn to me in spite of his resistance." "Nothing unusual about a male being afraid of a relationship that might lead to commitment," Delma said. "Look at you. You're the prettiest 19-year-old in town. Has he asked you out yet?" "This Saturday night," she said softly, her eyes gazing blindly at the display. Monday morning, Susie reported. The evening was wonderful, and so was the next evening, and the next, and the next they spent together. "Then why do I sense that it isn't going exactly the way you'd write the script?" Delma asked. "I just love being with him," Susie said, smiling secretly as she spoke. "I haven't told him, but I love him. I know how much he likes to be with me, but he keeps his distance, hardly even touching me. I sense these intense underlying currents of desire and fear within him. Last night we were watching TV at his house, and he just took a deep breath and plunged into his feelings. It was as though he suddenly surrendered. There was a feeling of desperation about it." "How was it?" Delma asked in a low, sexy voice. "Delma." "Well, it was very intense and passionate." Susie and Don now centered their lives around each other, quickly becoming very close and sharing more and more of themselves. She was blonde, 5'11", thin-hipped and slender. Don was 6'2", a dark, powerful figure of a man. "We complement each other quite well," she would say, putting a hand on his shoulder and suggestively rolling her hips. Their weeks together became months of a mutually enjoyed routine, driving together each morning to the mall located in Holiday, a suburb of Salt Lake City. Lunches were usually picnics eaten in the nearby park until the fall weather forced them indoors to discover a hideaway basement restaurant they nicknamed the Den of Iniquity. The first snow of the season was falling one morning when Susie arrived at work, her eyes red and swollen. "Good Lord, child, it looks like you cried all night. What happened?" "I don't even know, Delma. Just as I've come to feel safe and comfortable, sure of both our feelings, Don is drawn away from me. He's given no explanation. He just became distant and silent, impenetrable. We won't be seeing each other for a while." She sobbed, futilely attempting to shield her face from Delma's gaze. 4 months later, Don re-entered Susie's life, again plunging headlong into an all-consuming love affair. A call to overseas duty followed. He wrote daily letters from Hong Kong, the Philippines, and Guam, and Hawaii. Upon his return, they again lived together, and their love grew even more intense. Susie was again feeling safe and secure in the relationship when Don withdrew into silence for 2 months. Then, as if nothing had happened, he was back, stronger, closer, more desperate than before. "I'm so afraid I'll let you down," he said to Susie. "I know I'll let you down and you won't love me anymore. You'll leave. I know you'll leave. I'm just a loser, a failure." "Don, those terms don't fit you. I know you. You're a winner. Now stop it. You won't let me down and I won't leave you. I love you. Don't you have any idea how very, very much I love you?" He smiled lovingly at her and shook his head. "Let's make it work, honey. I love you too." The months of bliss lasted until shortly after Don received word of his transfer to Santa Ana. Susie resigned her job and was packing for the move they would make together when Don disappeared once more into his cold, silent world. Susie cried and pleaded. She held him in the darkness and whispered loving words in his ear as she ran her hands through his hair for hours. His only response was a hostile glare. On the morning of the day they were scheduled to move, her body was engulfed in weariness. She felt drained, hollow, lifeless. "I can't keep going through this, Don. You're going to have to go to California alone," she said, standing in the middle of a room piled high with taped cardboard cartons. He responded by moving the boxes containing his belongings to the other side of the room. By late afternoon, Don's boxes were gone, and Susie was alone in the apartment they no longer leased. "Oh, my God," she cried. "Universe, or my guides, or whoever's out there, please help me to understand why I feel such strong connection with him. Why do I feel compelled to always be there when he wants me? Why do I have such a strong need to reassure him? Why is he so afraid of a relationship with me? I need some answers. Please, please, please." Susie fell on the bed crying. There was a brief moment of dizziness and resistance as she let go of her painful physical world and spontaneously began to see mental images. She would later describe the experience as 2 hours of exquisitely sharp and clear visualizations, voices, and feelings so real and so intense, I didn't know if I was remembering them or living them. I was seeing through her eyes and experiencing every intimate feeling. At one point, I sat up screaming, wanting the impressions to stop, but they continued until it was over. The following is Susie's exact description of her experience. "One minute I was lying in my bed crying, and the next minute I was in Poland, just prior to World War II. I was young, probably 14 or 15, and very infatuated with a young boy in our neighborhood. He was a year or two older than I, and exceptionally bright in school. In my mind's eye, I can still see the street we lived on and feel the sunshine. I felt an optimistic hope. We had everything to look forward to. My next image was of hiding. My family and I were in a cramped, dark room with only one small, grimy window. I felt that we'd been hiding there for nearly 2 years. Then a friend of the family came to the door asking for me. Taking my hand, she led me down a long, narrow hallway. I kept asking, "Where are we going?" but she only laughed and told me to hurry. At last we reached a doorway at the end of the hall. She opened the door and stepped back, smiling. I walked, dazed, into the room filled with light and air, and the boy I had loved, now grown into manhood. I even saw the specks of dust in the air dancing in the sunlight streaming through an open window. I felt his arms around me, and I experienced his lovemaking for the first time that night. He was in the Polish resistance. My family was Jewish. For different reasons, we were both hiding from the Nazis. After being secretly married, we moved into an apartment of our own. I remember sitting in the dark with the curtains drawn. I was nursing a newborn baby and torn by mixed emotions. Our family life was happy, but it was also filled with fear due to his resistance work. Each time he left home, I didn't know if he would come back again. And I knew that by marrying a Jewess, he put himself in even more danger. I held my child closely and prayed for a miracle that would allow us to survive this madness. I had remained safely hidden for over 3 years. Perhaps, with God's help, it would continue. The visualizations then blurred, and I began to perceive German soldiers roughly pushing us down a long, twisting staircase. I was clutching my child, now about 6 months old, trying not to fall on the stairs. I remember being mesmerized by the rifle held by a soldier at the foot of the flight of stairs. When we reached him, he put the butt of the rifle into my back and pushed me down the next flight. Many emotions were racing through me: terror, shock, surprise, and some hope. We had heard terrible rumors about what they were doing to the Jews, but we couldn't believe them. Surely no one could treat other human beings in that way. It couldn't possibly be true. The horror of hiding was over. What was to come had to be better. We reached the street, and I saw a truck backed up near the door to the apartment house. People were being shoved into the back of this truck, and I could see them huddling on benches along the side of the interior. My child was crying. I tried to comfort her, but she continued to cry. Suddenly, a soldier tore my daughter out of my arms, threw her to the ground, and stabbed her through the chest with his bayonet while I helplessly watched. I began screaming. I heard rough voices but could not understand them. I felt my husband's arms around me, and I heard him tell me I must be quiet. I heard the soldiers tell him that he did not have to go to the ghetto with me. He was not Jewish. He'd only made the mistake of living with a Jewess, and he was free to stay where he was. He tightened his grip on me and told them he would go with me. I can still see the proud tilt of his head as he spoke these words. We were then pushed into the truck. My husband sat beside me on the bench along the left side of the truck. Tears streamed down my cheeks, and I felt myself beginning to withdraw, turning inward, going numb and silent, consumed by the images of my daughter's murder. We were transported directly to the Warsaw Ghetto, which had earlier been the Jewish section of town. The Germans had walled it in and were bringing in Jews from all over Poland to live there, the final step before the death camps. What followed was a long, dark time during which I saw and felt almost nothing. I knew where we were and that every day hundreds of people were being taken away in trucks. I knew that my husband was involved with a group of people in the ghetto who wanted to fight the Germans rather than continue dying in silence. We could no longer doubt the rumors of the death camps and the atrocities, and it had incensed some people enough to begin fighting back. They knew there was no hope. They wanted to die proudly fighting rather than be silently murdered. I was unable to respond to these things. I withdrew from my husband. My days were spent staring out the window of our apartment, which was on one of the top floors of the building. Although I had enough awareness to feel guilty about withdrawing from my husband, I couldn't seem to help myself. I remained alive only through the loving care of my husband and his friends' wives. As much as I wanted to live again and let him know of my love, I couldn't break through the numbness engulfing me. Our apartment building, once crammed to overflowing with people, was now nearly empty. The streets were empty except for sporadic battles when the Germans tried to enter. My husband and his friends attempted to get me to move into a room underground where it would be safer, but I insisted on staying where I could see out my window. The thought of being locked up again in a dark room was more than I could bear. I remained by my window and watched as flames leaped high into the night sky while the Germans bombed the ghetto in an attempt to quell the Jewish resistance. Suddenly, one morning, my numbness broke. Hate and rage flooded my awareness. Down on the street, I could see the German soldiers marching, guns at ready, warily eyeing the windows and doorways along their route. I started running. I heard my husband yell at me to stop. As I ran down the flights of stairs, I could hear his footsteps following frantically behind me. Reaching the bottom of the stairway, I burst out the door of the building and ran toward a young German soldier in the center of the street. Although I had no weapon, I was determined to kill him, knowing that it would mean my life. My rage and despair were so great that I wanted to kill just one of them in payment for my daughter and my family and friends. As I ran toward him, I was confronted by startled, icy blue eyes filled with disgust. It was as if he were looking at the most loathsome vermin on earth. In that split second, I realized the enormity of their hatred for us, a hatred strong enough to generate the madness we had been living for years. He was young, 16 or 17 at most. I realized he had been raised with that hatred and knew nothing else. Strangely enough, I understood him as he raised his rifle and fired. The bullet struck me in the chest, and I fell to the ground, still looking up at him. My husband ran up to me and kneeled, taking me in his arms. I heard the soldier order him to leave. He ignored the command and continued to cradle me. I watched as a bullet from the soldier's gun blew away the back of my husband's head, and I felt him slump against me as everything went black. Sunday morning, Delma dropped by Susie's apartment. "I couldn't believe it when you called," Delma said over coffee, sitting at Susie's kitchen table. "I thought you were long gone." Susie nodded. "Me too. You're my friend, Delma. You've been my only confidant during this entire misadventure with Don. You've been there since the first meeting, remember?" Susie related the spontaneous regressive experience, although she knew Delma didn't accept the concept of reincarnation. "When it was over, I stayed up all night, pacing, crying, reviewing what I'd experienced. I knew my husband in that life was Don in this life, and he died only because he loved me so much. He chose to enter the ghetto with me because of that love. How could he help but have a subconscious fear that loving me might mean disastrous consequences? My withdrawal and mental illness following the death of my child caused him to feel abandoned. In this life, Don has a terrible fear of abandonment. I think I understand why he mentally leaves me before I can abandon him, and why he's torn between his desires and his fears." Susie, this is incredible. Do you really accept this?" Delma asked, holding her coffee cup with both hands almost as a shield of protection. "If this is true, then everybody else would have a relationship based upon past lives. Even Ralph and I, heaven forbid. Once around the block with him is all I want to experience." Susie laughed at Delma's reaction. "It certainly feels true, Delma. Karma is logical, and it explains all the inequality in the world. It also explains why Don was so fearful of letting me down, of not being good enough, and why he felt like a loser and a failure. He fought so desperately in the resistance and in the ghetto without succeeding. In the end, he was unable to save my life or the life of our child. It's this inner awareness that he hasn't come to terms with." "Well, how can you come to terms with something you aren't consciously aware of?" Delma asked, shaking her head at the lack of logic. "If karma's the basis of physical reality, then we're here to learn to let go of fear. When I say that, I mean all the fear-based emotions, anger, selfishness, jealousy, hate, repression, greed, possessiveness, envy, guilt, all the rest. It's these fears that have trapped us on the wheel of reincarnation. Once we resolve them, we'll be free. It doesn't matter if you're aware of the fears. You're here to work through them at your own pace." "Well, what about your fears in regard to the situation?" Delma asked. "I don't think I've come to terms with my withdrawal and the way I abandoned him in Poland. Just thinking about it now, I feel guilty for allowing him to enter the ghetto with me," Susie replied. Her tone was apologetic. "Well, that's ridiculous," Delma snapped. "You were in shock. Your baby'd just been murdered. You couldn't have been thinking of such things, and he couldn't have left you without creating some bad karma. Oh, my God, I'm talking like I accept this. They both laughed together and moved to the couch in the living room. Oh, I'm glad he left you the furniture, Delma said, looking around the room. But I guess that isn't something you need to play Marine. That's another interesting thing, Delma. Don died fighting in Poland, and in this life he joined the Marines at 17 and was so gung-ho he did 2 tours in Vietnam. Well, maybe he wanted to get another shot at the bad guys, Delma said, almost inaudibly. So what happens next, Susie? 1981 is going to be the year we make it work. Maybe our 4th attempt to establish a solid relationship is what it will take to overcome the fear of the ghetto. I'm going to call him and see if he's willing to give it another try. And if he isn't? Well, then I'll wait 3 months and try again. I need to reassure him, to build him up, to let him know he's loved. I have to let him know that I believe in him completely. Are you going to tell him about your regressive experience? Delma asked. No, I don't think so. Don doesn't accept my metaphysical ideas. He'd think it was a rationale to justify what has happened. Well, isn't that a possibility? Delma said, getting up to leave. No, it isn't, Susie replied with cool authority. Life for Don and Susie in Santa Ana was good again for over a year. But in September of 1982, he moved alone to Hawaii, and Susie returned to Salt Lake City. You'll just become disappointed in me, or I'll become disappointed in you, he said. I know we would separate eventually, and it would only hurt more later. Susie claims that she was able to release the relationship fully and with love in 1983. He wasn't willing to face his fears in this life, and I can't judge him for that, she told me. But I was able to love him, understand him, and release him. I believe I've been able to let go of my fears created in our past. I have forgiven myself for the mistakes I made in the past life, and this one too. In so doing, I released my grief and the need I felt to make something up to Don. Was there anything else that helped you to let go? I asked. Yes, I asked for help from my guides. In another spontaneous subjective experience, I was allowed to see what our relationship would be like if I failed to let go. As hard as it's been for me to accept, the energies and misunderstandings of our previous incarnation remain. This vision showed a very painful and destructive relationship that would have manifested itself if we were to remain together. It was right after this experience I truly let Don go and released my energy from the past, allowing it the freedom to heal in its own way. Since you've been able to experience such powerful regressions on your own, have you ever explored if you've been together with Don in other lifetimes? I asked. Oh yes, we've had 2 happy long-term relationships that I know of. I've seen images and full scenarios of a life in the Deep South prior to the Civil War, and one in medieval Europe. I'm sure there are others, and I know we'll be together in a future life. Following her final separation from Don, Susie focused her energy on fine art. A gallery sponsored a one-man show, and she participated in many group exhibits in Utah, Montana, and New Mexico from 1983 to October 1985, when she experienced a block. I found myself strangely unable to do any artwork, Susie explained. I realized I was experiencing some sort of inner transformation. A study of New Age philosophy helped me understand this spiritual awakening. I now work in Salt Lake City as a psychic channel and healer, helping others to resolve their emotional problems and grow spiritually. As a channel, I can relate past life awareness from their spirit guides. Knowing why you have a problem is the first step to liberation. Chapter 5, Evelyn Koski and the Stranger. Law offices, Evelyn said automatically into the phone. On the other end of the line was her cousin Larry, whom she had not been in touch with for several years. He had recently reappeared in her life, and they had enjoyed many long conversations of remember when. They exchanged the usual pleasantries, and she asked where he was calling from. "I'm between planes in Chicago on my way to Terre Haute. A man I just met on the plane is here, and he wants to speak with you," he replied. "And you're calling me in Birmingham to tell—" She stopped in mid-sentence, realizing that there was no one on the other end. Waiting, she tapped her pen on the pink memo pad, expecting a relative or an old friend to begin speaking at any moment. To her surprise, the voice was that of a complete stranger, a soft, deep, resonant male voice. "Hello, my name is Louis Santel. I live in Chicago, and I just met your cousin on the plane," he said hesitantly. Suppressing a sigh, Evelyn rolled her eyes to the ceiling of the rosewood-paneled office. To her amazement, as she listened to Lou talk about his career in sales and other things unimportant to her, she began to feel a response stirring deep within her. But, despite her legal training, she could not remain focused upon his words no matter how hard she tried. "I've really enjoyed talking to you. May I call you tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes, sure, that would be nice," she replied. "Goodbye." Evelyn replaced the receiver in the telephone cradle, wondering why the call had created such an emotional reaction. It certainly wasn't based on anything that had been said, or what she could remember of it. "Anything wrong?" Marie asked from across the room. Marie was the firm's second legal secretary, as well as Evelyn's friend and confidant. Evelyn stared out the window into the garden courtyard. It was raining lightly, and the first leaves of spring were beginning to bloom. "No, nothing at all," she replied in a faraway voice. Thinking about the call, Evelyn decided, Crazy Larry obviously shared a few drinks with Louis, instigated the call, and that'll be the end of that. Well, so much for my analytical left hemisphere-oriented brain, she thought an hour later when Lou called again. "Evelyn, I don't understand it," he said, attempting to justify the call. "I'm a salesman. I talk to people all day, every day, and I search for excuses to find quiet time, but for some reason, I just had to talk to you again. I really don't know why." "Well, I don't want to sound silly, but as you talked to me, something inside me responded to you too," she said. She began to ask Louis about his life. "Yes, I'm single. You too? What are your interests and hobbies?" Evelyn was still thinking about their conversations when she opened the door to her condo and was greeted by Rupert, her Manx cat. Rupert anxiously awaited the feeding ritual every evening at 6 p.m. and sulked when his mistress remained in town for a dinner date. "All right, old boy," she said, scooping the cat into her arms. Rupert purred in response as she carried him into the bedroom, where he jumped from her arms to the bed and then to the makeup table, where he sat watching Evelyn changing from her wool business suit to cotton slacks and a casual blouse. Catching a glimpse of her reflection in the dresser mirror, Evelyn stopped, tilted her head to one side, placed her hands on her hips, and spoke directly to herself. "You're pretty damned attractive for a lady in her late 30s. You've got a great job and all the comforts of the good life, but your romantic life is going nowhere, Evelyn. You're so vulnerable, you're being turned on by meaningless phone calls from a stranger." In the days that followed, Evelyn found herself eagerly awaiting Lou's calls, usually several a day. After 2 months, he announced his plans to come to Birmingham. "I'll fly in late in the afternoon on Friday," he explained. "We'll have dinner together, but I'll have to fly back to Chicago later in the evening to be here for a sales meeting Saturday morning." "I'll be at the airport," Evelyn said. "But we've never even exchanged pictures. How will I recognize you?" "Well, you have a general idea what I look like," he laughed. "Just be there. I'm sure we'll know each other." Evelyn arrived at the airport 40 minutes early and sat watching the lights of the runway until Flight 710 from Chicago was announced over the loudspeaker. "Why am I so nervous?" she thought, as she waited for the passengers to come up the ramp from the plane. "I'm acting like a schoolgirl, yet..." Her thoughts froze in midstream when her eyes lit on a middle-aged, slightly balding man, and she experienced a shock of instant recognition. His smile went straight to her heart. "I knew it was you the moment I stepped into the gate area," Lou said, taking her hand. "I don't believe this. I really don't. I know you. We've never met before, but I know you." Lou was 45, slightly overweight, with a bald patch developing at his crown. His dark, affectionate eyes were his outstanding feature. He wore an immaculate, dark-colored business suit, white shirt, and maroon tie. Conversation was even easier in person than on the phone, and Lou had Evelyn relaxed and laughing before they left the arrival gate. The date was everything they had hoped to experience, and it served to intensify the telephone conversations. Later that evening, she cried as she watched the plane lift off the runway and disappear into the darkness. Lou began calling from Chicago as many as 6 or 7 times a day. He often flew to Birmingham for weekends, and Evelyn would meet him in Chicago. In the summer, they vacationed together at a secluded lake. "Aren't you ever going to marry him?" asked Marie as she glanced over the lunch menu. "For the last 2 years, the two of you have spent half your lives on the phone, and you live for the next time you'll be together. I don't understand." "I'm not sure I do either." Evelyn smiled as she beckoned the waiter to their table. "I swear they have better service at McDonald's," she said softly. "And you're changing the subject, Evelyn," Marie chided. "Marie, I've spent 1,000 hours attempting to analyze my relationship with Lou. It is totally illogical, but it's the most wonderful thing I've ever experienced. I have such an incredible love for him, and yet, with our personality traits and lifestyles, I just can't imagine us being married." "Well, how does he feel?" Maria asked. "The same way I do. We've talked a great deal about it, and we just don't want to spoil what we have." Marie picked up her salad and shook her head. "I guess I envy you anyway. I've never felt that deeply about anyone." Evelyn sighed, rolling her necklace between her thumb and index finger. "I don't know if I'm afraid of failure or afraid of success. I don't think I'm paranoid. Sure, I've been hurt by relationships in the past, but no more than anyone else." "If the two of you ever get together, you'll be able to afford matching sports cars just on the money you'll save on phone bills," Marie laughed. Evelyn agreed and then asked, "Will you cover for me this afternoon between 2 and 4? I've got to go to the doctor about a couple of lumps I found on my breast. And if Lou calls, please try to calm him down. I put off telling him until last night, and he was just absolutely hysterical. Then, just before we left for lunch today, he called to tell me that he'd spent the entire morning in church praying for my health. It was the first time he's been inside a church in over 30 years. Marie was smiling and holding the phone out to Evelyn when she stepped back into the law offices at 4:05 p.m. "Guess who?" she said teasingly. "Yes, Lou?" "Yes. No. The x-rays revealed lumps of a benign nature, according to the doctor. And I love you, and you're crazy." "Okay, but call me after I get home. Marie's been doing my work all afternoon, and I've got to help her get caught up before 5. Love you too. Bye." The 2 years became 4, and the relationship continued as before. Evelyn dated other men occasionally, but Lou continued to be the love of her life. Long-distance love, but intense and fulfilling nonetheless. Then, late one Friday afternoon in February, Lou called from the Denver airport to tell Evelyn he was boarding a plane to Chicago. "I'll call you as soon as I get home, monkey," he said. Evelyn hung up the phone. As she got up from her desk, she stood momentarily blank and shaken, then fell back into the chair. "What's wrong?" Marie yelled frantically. I don't know," Evelyn gasped. She attempted to get up again, but collapsed to the floor. Marie dashed to her side, calling for help. "No, Marie, no, wait, please," Evelyn pleaded. "Do you hurt? Where's it hurt?" Marie demanded, fearfully. "Here, in the area of my gallbladder. Searing pain, but it's starting to go away." "It really is. Would you please just get me a drink of water?" She sipped the water Marie brought her and sat up. "It's gone. The pain is gone. I'm fine, Marie. Don't worry," she said as she stood up, adjusting her skirt. After reassuring the law partners of her well-being, Evelyn sat beside Marie on the couch in the empty office waiting room. "Wow, that was incredible. I hurt so bad, but all I could see, almost like a dream, was Lou's face in front of me, distorted with pain." "You mean he hurt because you hurt?" Marie asked, placing her hand on Evelyn's forehead as if checking for a fever. "I guess," Evelyn replied, leaning back on the couch with her eyes shut. "His face was there, vividly at first, then just slowly fading away." Evelyn waited for the call Lou had promised to make upon his return to Chicago. At midnight, she called him, but only reached his answering machine. All weekend, she continued to call as her concern grew into panic. It was Monday morning, shortly after her arrival at the law offices, that she received a call from a Chicago hospital. "Is this Miss Evelyn Koski? I've agreed to place this call in an attempt to calm down one of our patients." Then came the barely audible whisper, "Sayuchi, I love you." It was Lou. The nurse came back on the line and explained that he had a ruptured gallbladder and was too weak to say anything more at this time. "If I fly to Chicago, can I see him?" Evelyn asked in a trembling voice. "Absolutely not," was the reply. "He's in very critical condition and no visitors are allowed." It was a week before Evelyn was to learn the details from Lou as she stood at his bedside. "Right after I called you from Denver, just as I was about to board the plane, I was hit by such excruciating pain that it totally immobilized me," he explained. "The emergency room doctors found a ruptured gallbladder. They wanted to operate right then and there, but I insisted that they fly me back to Chicago. So I was packed in ice and flown directly to the hospital. They tell me that after the surgery, the emergency surgery, my condition was so critical the doctors saw no chance for recovery, and they sent a priest who gave me the last rites." "You were critical for 3 days," Evelyn cried, the tears streaming down her cheeks. "But you still insisted the nurse call me." "I just couldn't leave this life without telling you that I loved you one more time," he said. "But who is Sayuchi?" Evelyn asked. "You said, 'Sayuchi, I love you.'" "I haven't the faintest idea," Lou replied, "but you were the only person in the world I was thinking about.